Today we're looking at all the latest headlines from Arizona football after their spring showcase, and we're examining that with Mike Luke of Locked On Wildcats. Let's go.
Locked On Pac-12, your daily podcast on the Pac-12 Conference. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On Pac-12. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin, D1 play-by-play broadcaster. Thanks for making this your first listen or your first view if you're watching on YouTube every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. This is your number one source to stay up to date with the latest news in the Conference of Champions every weekday, which is why you should like and subscribe wherever you're listening to or watching the show if you haven't already. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. I am joined today by Mike Luke of Locked On Wildcats because we're going down to Tucson here on the show to discuss all things coming out of the football program down there. Mike, good to have you, my man.
Yeah, Spencer, nice to meet you, my man. Ready to rock and roll.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the fun part about this business for us is like you just meet people, just hop on, do a show, boom, let's go. Yeah. He's got the you got the Arizona A in the background. I know you're ready to rock and roll, and I'm sure the people are as well. So let's go into the spring showcase. There are plenty of things to take away. I think some people, might overlook them generally and say like, what can you really make of it? It's a scrimmage. It's this, it's that. But you're getting an insight into what the coaches see kind of day in and day out. So, one of the takeaways for Arizona right now is the momentum they've got on the recruiting trail and in the transfer portal a little bit as well, who we'll definitely get to with Jayden de Laura. But there just seems like there's more talent on this roster than there has been in the last couple of seasons for Arizona. So coming out of the spring game and, spring practices now being over and whatnot, and everybody getting towards summer vacation, what have kind of been your biggest takeaways from a roster perspective for Arizona?
Well, you hit the nail on the head that there's certainly more talent than there has been in recent years. But, when you're on a 20-game losing streak, that's all relative, I guess, at that point. But, it starts at the quarterback position. Last year, obviously, you had Will Plummer and Gunnar Cruz, and that, quite frankly, just isn't going to cut it. Those are more NAU-type quarterbacks. And so Jedd Fisch brings in Jayden de Laura, who is the previous Pac-12 Freshman of the Year at Washington State. And he brings in Noah Fafita to compete with him. Now, de Laura is going to start. The things that stick out immediately about him is that he gets the ball out very quickly. He's got some pretty good snap on his release. And he's not tall. I will say when I stood next to him, I expected him to be about 6 foot. He's about 5'10". But, in college, it doesn't carry quite the stigma that it does, obviously, in the NFL. So the quarterback position, obviously, is where you're starting with, and that's certainly replenished. And I will say that if you didn't know who was who, most people would probably think Noah Fafita was the better quarterback, but I'd still be surprised if Jayden de Laura isn't getting those first snaps for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, I mean, he was just so successful for Washington State a season ago, had him in the mix in the Pac-12 North. They won the Apple Cup by a historic margin for Washington State. I personally was pretty shocked when I saw that he was in the portal, and I was not surprised that he stayed within the Pac-12. I don't think he had a feel because of, the physical traits that you were just talking about of, going to a Big Ten or an SEC.
Right.
Maybe a Big 12 could have been in there, but he just kind of feels like he's a West Coast kid, fits well, knows the conference, knows how to win in this conference, and that's what Arizona is certainly looking for, right? It's just to win, just win somehow, some way, win some games. But with de Laura coming in, I think it's a great addition because you know what you're going to get there, whereas it's been a revolving door the last few seasons, going back to when Khalil Tate was the quarterback. That's kind of the last consistent starter Arizona's had, where Wildcat fans, I think, even felt semi-confident about who was going to be the signal caller. But now de Laura slides in there, and I think that's plenty of reason to feel optimistic about who the quarterback's going to be this year.
And it's nice, too, because it's not like you're relying on somebody who doesn't have a track record. I mean, you've got a track record of, like you talked about, a guy that can play, and that he put up big numbers in the Apple Cup game. This is a player that if he if he puts up 3,500 yards and 25, 28 touchdowns, I don't think anybody should be in the least bit surprised because, quite frankly, he's done it before. Different offense, obviously, but they brought in some really nice receivers to complement him. So, assuming that he's good to go, this should be a significantly better offense there, Spencer.
Yeah, and I just think you have a guy in de Laura who also brings sort of a presence about him to the locker room, right? It is when you're a program that hasn't been winning games and that has been just so downtrodden as Arizona has been. I mean, they've been the bottom dweller in the Pac-12 over the last several seasons, and it hasn't, unfortunately, for the Wildcats been close. I mean, even Colorado has been ahead of them, and Cal, has had some low moments, but still has overall been ahead. And so I think having a guy who you look at and say, all right, he's won some games here in this conference and knows what it takes to do that and is able of being productive enough, but also leading his team in a way that's going to allow you to be more competitive. I think it is a really good thing. And, he's the transfer, the name that stands out when you're talking about the talent upgrade. But what other areas of this roster do you think are going to be, dramatically improved from a season ago?
Well, wide receiver, you go from having one of the worst receiving cores to one of the best, at least on paper. I mean, you and I were talking about it before we came on. Jacob Cowan comes in from UTEP, who, caught for almost 1,400 yards last year. And then you're going to be able to pair him with Tetairoa McMillan, a 5-star wide receiver out of California that, depending on the service, was one of the 2 or 3 best wide receivers in the entire nation. You generally don't get players like that at Arizona. And to have both of those guys right there is going to be I think, a really nice fit. And then you've got some other guys that you're bringing in. You got a multitude of 4-star kids, a Kean Burnett, a Kevin Green, who's a USC decommit. And then you bring in guys like a Dorian Singer, who played really well last year. Wide receiver has received a huge talent bump right there, Spencer.
And if you're looking at last year's Arizona team and the 1-11 season that, every Arizona fan is trying to forget, right? If you're looking at that and thinking about how they can get better, do you think it was more offensively driven a season ago? You think of a game like the loss or the win against Cal, right? You only allowed 3 points, which is great, but you only scored 10 as well. Do you think it was more offense, more defense, or do you think it was kind of, both sides playing the part there that led to a tough year for the Wildcats?
Well, the offense was definitely worse than the defense. The defense was kind of middling, kind of your middle of the pack, pardon the pun type group. But, and there were games, though, where you lost to NAU, where the defense only gave up 10 points, I believe, 7 or 10 points. I mean, that you can't lose in situations like that. But it just seemed like it just happened time and time and time again. Now, there were games when the defense, basically broke because you just don't have a ton of talent back there. But overall, it was an okay unit. The problem, though, was the offense. The offense just couldn't score points for the majority of the time. And you wondered a lot of the time what the quarterback's looking at, because especially if you're up in the press box, you could see wide open guys. And, especially with Gunnar Cruz, he would take a 2-yard sack or he would throw it 80 yards out of bounds instead of passing it to a guy up, in front of him for 8 yards. So the offense was a major, major problem. And I think a significantly bigger problem than the defense was there, even though the defense certainly wasn't good.
I think there's one more question we have to answer when it comes to Jayden de Laura, which we'll get to after I remind you that our partners at BetOnline continue to be the #1 source for all your betting needs and sports info. You can find all the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, go Mariners, fights, and even next season's NFL futures. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. Bet online, where the game starts. One question I think Arizona fans should be pondering in a very reasonable way about Jayden de Laura is he's won a lot of games. He put up some great statistics as a freshman. Comes in Arizona. There's plenty of expectations there, right? But the offense is different than what he had up at Wazoo, where they've, even the post-Mike Leach era, they've kind of stayed committed to the air raid approach with Jake Dicker as their head coach now, former defensive coordinator. So de Laura coming into this Arizona system, should Arizona fans expect that he's going to be as productive, at least statistically, as he was up in Pullman when he makes the trip down to Tucson because they're not running the air raid like the Cougars?
That's a great question. I don't know that I would expect that, but Jedd Fisch is a guy that certainly has a good offensive reputation. He's been an offensive coordinator multiple places. Josh Rosen, take for what it's worth, swears by him. And so, but again, it's not going to be that kind of quick hitting offense. Honestly, I don't know exactly what to expect, to be honest with you. But I do think that you should see significantly better numbers, obviously, across the board. But as far as kind of playing in that Washington State type offense, no, I certainly don't see something like that. I think that's probably pretty unreasonable. And any Arizona fan that's expecting that's probably a little bit misplaced.
Yeah, I think it's just a different philosophy of sorts, right? A little bit more pro style, a little bit more conventional and run heavy, whereas the Cougars use the pass to set up the run game.
Mm-hmm, very much so.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say we're going to move to three players who earned playing time during the spring game, spring showcase, whatever you want to call it. Before we get to those three individuals, I was prepping for the show and reading some pieces from guys who cover the team, and I wanted your opinion if you agree that this is kind of the vibe that was there. But it felt like it was a little bit more about the football and actually trying to work on things on the field than in years past. That's kind of the vibe I got. And when I watched it, watched the highlights back of it, that's certainly the way it looked. You weren't seeing a bunch of weird trick plays. You did have the one pass to the former women's basketball star in the corner of the end zone.
Right.
But on the whole, did it feel different than past Arizona spring games?
Not really, mainly because, there was certainly more talent, but a lot of it was gimmicky. But at the same time, though, you could tell that there are certain players that they want to give the ball to. Offensively, Jonah Coleman was a running back out of Folsom, California that Arizona featured to start the game, and they gave him the ball early and often. You generally don't do that with a true freshman unless you have a pretty good idea that they're going to be playing some major minutes right there. So it was a little bit better than obviously last year, mainly because I don't think Fisch had any clue what he was dealing with. But Jonah Coleman is certainly a player to keep an eye on in that regard. Another guy to keep an eye on is Kean Burnett. He was originally committed to USC, high 4-star tight end. He caught the first pass of the scrimmage where, he's a big dude. He's about 6'5", 230, kind of boxed out the linebacker and then took a touchdown hitch for a touchdown later on in that drive. He's certainly a guy that I would imagine will get significant playing time. I'm not sure he's going to start because of the physicality of the position, but he was really, really good throughout camp and in that game. And then, that third guy is, you could go back and forth between whether a Hunter Echols on the defensive side who seemed to get a sack every practice, but another guy is Noah Fafita. I keep bringing him up, but he was the best. He was the best quarterback in that spring game. Now you could say that he was going against the second team guys, whatever the case may be, but there's something a little bit unique about him. The reason that Arizona got this recruiting class was essentially because of him and all of his buddies that he played with at Servite wanting to follow him. But those were 3 or 4 guys that really kind of stuck out to me, Spencer's guys that were either going to get playing time or certainly are on the precipice of getting it.
Yeah, and one guy who we mentioned earlier as well is Jacob Cowing, the UTEP transfer. What do you think Arizona can get from him this year? Because he had a tremendously productive season last year for the Miners down there in El Paso. What do you think Arizona has in him, and how do you think he'll be used in the offense?
I think you use him every way. He looks like an NFL receiver. He's not huge, so that certainly is a little bit different, but he's about 5'11", 190. He's a guy that I think you try to use every way you can. You try to get him the ball. You try to get him on screens. You try to get him off slants. You try to get him off deep curls. I don't know that there's really anything that he can't do, and I think that you're certainly expecting him, or at least Arizona fans should certainly expect him or Tetairoa McMillan to be catching for around 900 to 1,000 yards this year. I think if things go well for Cowing, I think he looks at he projects as an NFL player, and I think he wants to get to the league sooner than later, and I think Arizona certainly was able to sell him on that at least.
Yeah, I think after a really tough offensive season like we alluded to earlier in the show, the idea of having T-Mac on the outside and then Cowing in the slot, I think that's at least a good base, certainly with de Laura at quarterback. as well. But Fafita, pretty highly rated quarterback recruit, and de Laura comes in with 3 years of eligibility left. So what's that dynamic looking like in the quarterback room? Because you see this a lot now with the one-time freebie transfer, right? Everybody's wondering, like, well, if this highly rated quarterback recruit doesn't play soon, then is he just going to transfer? Is that something that's on the minds of Arizona fans right now in the program?
That's an interesting question. I don't know exactly. I think with a guy like de Laura with his background, you're going to start him because it looks bad politically too if you've got a guy of those credentials who doesn't who comes in and he doesn't start. It's very difficult to able to lure in other transfers than when you say, well, the Pac-12 freshman of the year got in here and he didn't start. So he's going to start. He's going to get every opportunity. But Fafita, I think, is certainly going to try to lay claim to that second spot. And, it's kind of the Wally Pipp rule that, you certainly don't want to get hurt if you're de Laura, because I think Fafita's got the ability to be able to snatch that starting spot if he does get that opportunity.
Yeah. What have you seen from Fafita so far? True freshman, right?
Yeah, true freshman. Football comes naturally to him. His problem is he's 5'8" or 5'9". He's a little dude. But his arm is more than good enough. He can navigate the pocket. He can get out. He makes good decisions. And you can just tell that players feed off of him. There's a confidence level around him that not a lot of other players on the team have. And, it's kind of an overused term, but he kind of has that it factor there, Spencer. And I would be surprised if he didn't get meaningful snaps at some point this season.
I don't think it's overused at all, the term it factor, because when guys don't have it, it's pretty evident.
Yeah,
and you're just asking yourself, like, well, he's got all the physical traits and he's not and you can
why isn't this working? Right.
Yeah, exactly. It's like something is not clicking there. Right. And it's usually that it factor that no one knows about. For some guys, the lights go on and everything starts to move a little bit slower. You can make better reads and you're able to be a productive player. For some guys, it just doesn't work. There's one transfer that I do want to ask you about. It came over from USC and might boost the defense. But first, I want to remind you that this episode is brought to you by Built Bar. I just received very recently my birthday cake puffs, and I've literally never had anything like them before. You bite in, and you have this wonderful kind of frosting like outside, and then you have a protein-infused marshmallow on the interior, and it's birthday cake flavored. Absolutely fantastic. I don't know if you've had yours yet, Mike.
Oh, I have. It's fantastic. You're like you said.
Oh my gosh, they are amazing. 150 calories, 16 grams of protein. That's all you need to know, everybody. Along with the traditional Built bars, you can get them all at Built.com if you use the promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at Built.com. The other transfer I want to ask you about is Hunter Echols, who has been pretty impressive in the spring overall, but I think he comes in with a good deal of hype. It's only going to be 1 year in Tucson. Right. He already played for 4 seasons at USC, but for a program that's trying to move in the right direction, how impactful do you think he could be in 1 season for that defense?
That's a great question. He should be good. I'm always hesitant though about guys who have come from other schools that really haven't done much in 3 or 4 years. It's a little bit different, obviously, at USC because a lot of times you have first and second and third round picks in front of you. But he's been fantastic. I mean, you could make the case that he's been their best player on defense this entire camp. He's been that dude. It seems like he gets a sack pretty much every practice. In the spring game, he did nothing to alleviate that. That optimism. If you're Arizona, I think you're hoping that you can pencil Hunter Echols in for 8 or 9 sacks this year because Arizona hasn't had a guy like that in quite a while that was able to do that. He's made that kind of impact so far, Spencer.
Yeah, and defensively, Arizona was not great a season ago. It was better than the offense, but that's like saying you have a vertical that can, jump over a 1-foot-high bar. Like that's
right. Yeah, it's like what are we talking about right here?
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. But something that Coach Fisch was asked about after the spring game was turnovers because a season ago Arizona was last in the FBS with a -17 turnover margin. They didn't force a lot of turnovers last spring, and then they didn't force a lot of turnovers in the fall once the season got underway. Then they turned the ball over too often. Now they've got a new defensive coordinator with Johnny Nansen coming over from UCLA. He was their defensive line coach over there. And the Bruins didn't have a prolific defense themselves. So what have been the early impressions with Nansen as the DC, and what are your expectations for him?
He basically, I mean, he came in and he said he wanted to be aggressive. Don Brown, last year's defensive coordinator, was fairly aggressive to kind of mixed results, but it was still a better defense than we had seen, that we were used to seeing in previous years. Nansen, I think, needs to do a lot of that. He's also going to be that main recruiter. He's going to be tasked with recruiting, and so it's kind of a twofold type thing with him, where he's got to be able to show he can put a competent defense on the field and to be able to recruit. I mean, he's got a lot on his plate, but this is his first time, in this position, so he should have a lot of motivation. I'll put it to you like that.
Yes, certainly. I mean, I don't think it has to be immediate this year where it's a dramatic one-season turnaround and Arizona's got a top 3 defense in the conference, but you have to start having things start to move in the right direction, right? Because when you're down as a program, you're looking for signs, you're looking for things to hold on to where you can say, okay, this is something that we can build on here. And Arizona has been doing that on the recruiting trail. I mean, they brought in a top 25 high school class this year. Now their composite rating drops a little bit when you factor in the transfer portal, but the fact that they're having success on the high school trail is a really encouraging sign for Jedd Fisch and that entire coaching staff. So is that having a different feel around the program now that, obviously you're going to have a bunch of true freshmen come in, only a couple are going to play, but you just got to start to build those classes one on top of the other. So before we get to kind of expectations for this season, what's it been like seeing those recruiting numbers pop up and Arizona fans suddenly look around going, hey, that's pretty good. That's what we need.
Well, yeah, it's crazy because you're used to having a recruiting class that's going to be somewhere in the top, or somewhere around 50, whereas now it's like in top 25, and you're beating out USC and Oregon for players. A lot of people don't even know exactly how they're doing it, what's going on, but you're certainly going to take that. It's been unique. I'll put it to you like that, Spencer. Arizona fans are not used to generally having this kind of recruiting success.
Yeah, and it's something that you have to do, right? It's just a part of college football. I've always kind of lamented the narratives about coaches like, oh, well, he's just winning all those games because he has better players than the other side. Well, in the NFL, that's one thing, but in college, recruiting guys is 70% of the battle here.
Well, right.
And just being able to dominate the opponent, and like that's a huge.
That's part of your job.
Yeah, that's a huge part of your job. That's how you assess someone as a college coach is how is he as a recruiter? Like, even if he's really good on Saturdays with X's and O's, if he can't bring in the guys to compete with the other teams in his conference, it's not going to matter. And I think Jedd Fisch still has a lot to prove with regards to both of those areas, right? Because he has to bring it on Saturdays and start to win games. But so far, I'd say the early recruiting results are pretty darn good. I mean,
they're fantastic. He's been an A+ recruiter so far. There's no way you can minimize that whatsoever there, Spencer.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's, more than half the battle right there. Now you have to be able to maintain that over a couple seasons to be competitive, but it all starts with the first one. It looks like this is very much going to be that for Arizona. I mean, you look at a guy like T-Mac, Oregon fans were really excited about the potential of getting him. And instead he goes down to Arizona, and that's probably a place he's going to stay now that he's got Jayden de Laura there. So they've got this offseason momentum in the recruiting cycle. How many wins do you think they need in 2022 to keep it going, right? If you're going to bring in, let's say, back-to-back top 25 high school recruiting classes nationally, how many wins do you think Arizona has to have this year?
4 or 5, because I think at that point you can really show that, okay, first year I came in, 12-game losing streak, we won 1 game. This year we won 5. Everything's kind of going towards year 3 where we can get 8 or 9 wins. And then year 4, I've got all my own guys in here, and hopefully we can get 9, 10 wins. So somewhere in that 4 or 5 range. They got a really tough out-of-conference schedule, but they should be able to win some games because the Pac-12 South isn't exactly brutal.
No, I'd say the South is tougher than the North, though, because you look at the South, you've got UCLA, USC is going to be vast improved, and of course you've got Utah, and then Arizona State, who is trending in the wrong direction, it would seem, on the recruiting trail, is still coming off of an 8-win season last year, and Herm Edwards has consistently been in the 7-9 win rate. So I think they're actually in the tougher of the two Pac-12 divisions. But do you think getting to the 4 or 5 win mark is feasible for where this program is at with its roster?
Yeah, I think it is. I think honestly, I think ASU is going to be awful because they've lost 30 scholarship players off their team. And these are good players too. So I think that's a game that's very winnable. Colorado is very winnable. I don't really see SC or Utah being winnable games, but UCLA you could maybe get. I think there's 3 or 4, or I think there's about 4 wins to be had in there. You should be able to beat North Dakota State, but again, they're probably the best Division II school in the country. So, when I look at the schedule, though, I think you can realistically say you guys should be able to win about 4 games this year. I'm okay with that.
Does Arizona have Cal on their schedule?
That's a great question.
Well, we're gonna look at that right now. That's how prepared we are for this particular line of questioning. North Dakota State Arizona. At the FCS level, that is the premier power. They're the Alabama of FCS football, and get that it's a step lower. But if they went FBS, that's something that has been considered for a long time with North Dakota State. That is
Arizona does get Cal, by the way.
They do have Cal. Again, that's a win. I'm not saying it's an easy win. I think Cal's in a slightly better spot. They're off of a 5-win season in which they ended really strong. They had Jack Plummer from Purdue to come in and probably be their starting quarterback. And Wilcox is going to have a well-coached defense there. But if you're looking at winnable games, I'd say Cal is in there. Colorado is in there. North Dakota State is in there. I agree with you about ASU. And then if you can find an upset win somewhere else that sort of, grabs some headlines and gets people's attention, if you beat a USC or a UCLA or a Utah somewhere, then I think that would do wonders for the program.
Oh, 100%. If they can do that, because then you can show it's not just promises. You can show what you're building on the field. If you can do that, then that, like I said, that takes away a lot of concerns there. And I think it makes it even easier to sell recruiting.
Yeah, well, the season can't get here fast enough. You can check him out on Twitter at Iron Mike Luke. Appreciate you coming on the show and talking all things Wildcats, man.
Right, for sure. I appreciate you, my man. It's great getting to meet you, and we'll be doing this again soon.
Yes, indeed, we will. I appreciate everyone listening or watching. I'll see you next time, and have a wonderful rest of your day.